And we're back with Johnny Mack with all the NFL news and notes right now on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN. He appears via the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Johnny, what's up, pal?
Hey, welcome back, Mike.
It's of all the things that I miss, talking to you every day was on the top of that list.
At least in the top 100, I would think. Somewhere in that range.
Let's get into it. A lot going on in the NFL, as there always is. A lot of reports the other day that the Eagles had offered a contract. In fact, when I read your article, I felt that it was a done deal, right? It was reassuring that Chris Long was going to be back in Philadelphia. Not so fast. The NFL Network reporting that he was mulling over a football decision on whether he wanted to return to the team, which included the possibility of retiring. So, where does Chris Long's return stand today?
Yeah, it was a bit of a strange story only because the news came out of the restructured contract. And as I pointed out later on 973ESPN.com, those things are not one-sided. The Eagles can't work out a restructured deal without the approval of Chris Long and without the signature of Chris Long. So the assumption is if you rework your deal, you're going to play. And I think that was the immediate reaction of everyone, and that's what it should have been. From the Eagles' perspective, it makes no sense to rework a deal with somebody who may not want to play, except they had a $500,000 roster bonus due on March 18th. So ultimately, that might have been the stepping stone, and it seems like the Eagles worked out a deal, not only, by the way, for 2018, but for 2019 with Chris Long on the assumption he's going to play. If not, if he does decide to retire, they'll simply rip it up and move on and move in a different direction. But as Chris talked and mentioned at his charity event in St. Louis on Wednesday, he's likely going to be back, and that was the indication of why he signed the restructure.
So the Eagles offered him a raise basically to return to the team, and he accepts the raise and then decides, you know what, I'm not so sure about this. I mean, did he have second thoughts after he signed the deal is what you're saying?
Well, I don't know if it was second thoughts as much as that deadline of March 18th for the $500,000. So I think what ultimately comes down to is the Eagles said, look, we want you back. You have said in the past you want to continue playing, and Chris has. He's been talking about it for a while, but he's always said, I only want to play if it's the right situation. And that's where the football part of it comes in, and the fact that now the Eagles have Michael Bennett. And at least on the surface, if you look on paper, well, the role that Chris was so effective in last season is no longer there, because you're not going to take Michael Bennett off the field in nickel situations. You're obviously not going to take Brandon Graham off the field. You're not going to take Fletcher Cox off the field. So that leaves Derek Barnett. Do you want to have Derek Barnett as a nickel pass rusher, or do you want to have Chris Long? And as I mentioned to Josh while you guys were gone, Chris was a better player than Derek Barnett in his rookie season. He was more effective, but more comes into it. And the fact that Derek has an extremely high ceiling as a player, and he's obviously got a far longer shelf life. So you want to keep him going in the right direction. So I don't think the Eagles can guarantee, Chris, you're going to have the same role. And I think that's where Chris's sort of hemming and hawing comes from. He doesn't know if he's going to be in the same role that was so successful last season.
Long will be 33, by the way, for the Eagles, and you wonder, can he compete at the level that he did this past year? I mean, sometimes these guys hit that wall pretty quickly. We saw Connor Barwin have a really big year one, and then the next year he kind of, he bottomed out a little bit.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think he can still play. I think he can still play at a high level. I mean, his production was off the charts last season, but I think partially you also have to be realistic. One of the reasons it is because the Eagles have so many other good players on the field, and there's a lot of attention being paid to Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham, so that gives Chris Long a lot of one-on-ones, and he's able to effectively still do that at this stage. I think that continues. I don't think that's going away. But if you're Jim Schwartz, if you're Chris Wilson, the defensive line coach, do you want to sort of limit Derek Barnett's snaps in the second season? I'm not sure they want to do that. I think they want to go up, and they want to make sure he keeps going in a positive direction. He keeps improving. And if that's the case, that role isn't there, and I think that's the biggest issue for Chris Long.
John, in your mind, have the Eagles done everything they can from their perspective to bring him back? I mean, have they done everything they can? Because you're right, it's not about the money, and he came here because it was a good fit at the time, but that was with Derek Barnett as a rookie. You didn't know what you
Can't be about the money. He gave all his money to charity.
What I mean.
Yeah. No, I mean, Chris has made a ton of money, and I wrote about that today. I mean, he was a former number 2 overall pick in the old collective bargaining agreement when these guys made just tons and boatloads of money. So he's got enough money to live the rest of his life, and as I put, 10 more lives very, very comfortably. So it's not about the money for him. The Eagles gave him a raise. The Eagles said, look, we want you back. We love what you bring to this team. We love what you bring to this organization. But as I also said, you can't promise things unless you're the New York Jets, and the New York Jets are the New York Jets for a reason. You don't promise things to players in March. The reality is, look, there's always injuries. This is professional football. So maybe Michael Bennett is injured. Maybe Brandon's injured. And the role opens back up. But at least as we stand here today, on paper, as I said, you can't get Bennett, Graham, and Cox off the field. You can't. They're star players. They're Pro Bowl level players. They're going to be out there. And then you have to ask yourself, what do you want to do in that role, in that situation, is either limit Derek Barnett and continue to give Chris Long those snaps in the nickel, or, as I said, try to maximize the potential of Derek Barnett. Ultimately, I think the Eagles are going to lean towards the latter. I think they should lean towards the latter. And I'm not sure Chris will be happy from that from a football perspective. Playing time-wise, he's going to see the same amount of snaps because essentially Vinny Curry's gone, Michael Bennett's here. You still have the 4-man rotation. But the roles in those 4-man rotations change because Bennett is a great pass rusher, not a good pass rusher, a great pass rusher, and Vinny Curry was an average pass rusher. So they took Vinny off the field in nickel situations, and that's why Long and Barnett were on the field.
Is Chris Long, do you think he's looking at this as, will I come back in this role or I just don't come back at all?
I don't think so, because he said he's leaning towards coming back, and ultimately I do think he will come back, and that's why he signed the paper, which essentially is an extension in the restructure. I mean, he wouldn't have signed it if he was convinced he was walking away, and he certainly did. So ultimately I think he'll be back. But remember, this is a guy who spent his entire career losing with the Rams on some really, really bad teams. And then he signed with the Patriots, and he won Super Bowl 51, and he played more than he played here. He played about 65% of the snaps, and he walked away. And he walked away because he wanted to play in a different role that let him pin his ears back and go after the quarterback. So you never know with Chris Long. He's got a lot of other interests, but from his mouth, he's probably going to be back.
Yeah, you said a lot of other interests. When he says stuff like, is your body there? Is your mind in it? Do you have the passion? Is he alluding to like the early in his career when, he was going through the motions for teams that he didn't really like playing on?
No, I mean, this guy's never gone through the motions. I mean, he was a very good player on the Rams, and he always has been a high-energy, high-motor player. That was never a knock against Chris Long ever in his career. He's just on a bunch of bad teams. And then he went to the Patriots and all of a sudden won the Super Bowl. Now he's done it back-to-back. So anytime that happens, you have to start asking yourself at 32, he's going to be 33 next week. Yeah, guys are going to say, do you want to go out on top? Obviously, he's closer to the end of his career than the beginning. And if you do want to write your own final chapter, what better way to go out than 2 consecutive Super Bowls on different teams?
Hey, John, it's evident that he has become a very popular guy, not only with the fans, but I guess in the locker room. And, Dave Weinberg, who covers the Eagles down here for the press, wrote a column the other day saying, this team is already taking a lot of turnover and change. Losing a guy like Chris Long, that could be a big hit in the locker room with some of the other guys like LeGarrette Blount that they've already lost. Is this a guy that you think they should maybe do a little bit more to try to keep, or have they done enough to try to keep him?
No, I think they've done enough. And he is, Dave's right, he is great in the locker room and all that, but we were having these same kind of discussions when the Eagles traded Jordan Matthews, who was a big locker room guy, and moved on from John Doran-Boss, who's as big a locker room guy as you can be. This is a tough industry, and it's based on production. He's certainly produced, and the Eagles gave him a raise, and they let him know they wanted not only to be in their plans this year, but also, as I said, in 2019. I think from their perspective, they've indicated very clearly they want him back, but they've also improved the defensive line with the addition of Bennett. So you have to be realistic, and that's where I said you can't promise things. I mean, you can't promise he's going to have the same role because you've improved with Bennett and you've brought in a better pass rusher.
What's the end game, John, of this playing hard to get thing? It's not to change his role or anything like that. He's just it's legitimately a guy that's mulling over his. It's not trying to force anything from the Eagles side or it's just a guy that's conflicted.
Yeah, it's just a guy who's conflicted. He's not trying for anything. He already signed the piece of paper. If he is going to play, he already knows his contract. That's not an issue. He's not trying to get extra years or extra money. It's just about, does he want to continue to play because of his age, because of the fact he's done everything you can do in this game. He's won 2 Super Bowls. And does he want to come back in a modified role, which at least in March he looks like he's going to have. But again, things can change a lot through the offseason, through training camp. There can be injuries. There can be more player movement. And just right now, certainly it's something you always think about. I mean, if you go out to Western Pennsylvania last season, they were talking about Ben Roethlisberger. Is he going to come back? A lot of guys, you hit your 30s, and you start thinking about your football mortality, and the first thing you start to think about is, do I want to go through this grind again? Because it's a grind to play in this league physically. And then you go from there, and some people do walk away, and some continue.
All right, let's get into some NFL news. There was a lot today. The Giants have traded Jason Pierre-Paul to the Bucs for 2 picks. Buccaneers, Bo Allen, Vinny Curry, Jason Pierre-Paul. Obviously, they are reloading their defensive front. It was a big disappointment. It was a disappointing season for the Bucs last year. What are the Giants trying to do in this deal? And give us your insight on how this deal kind of works out for both sides.
Well, I think the most interesting part is how much dead money the Giants were willing to take on to make this trade, about $15 million. But, I mean, from a football sense, it's about they're changing from a 4-3 to a 3-4. And obviously Jason Pierre-Paul is not going to be a 5-technique defensive end. He's not going to play inside. And can you project him as a 3-4 outside linebacker? Well, that's a really, really big 3-4 outside linebacker. He can certainly rush the passer standing up, but can he drop into coverage? Probably not. So I don't think he was a fit for their change defensively. So that's why they made the trade. And you know, we've seen a lot of high-profile trades this offseason, more than usual, and I think the NFL's trending in that direction. But it's just a change in defense, and he's no longer a fit for what they want to do.
Interesting that not that Pierre-Paul was a failure by any stretch. He won a Super Bowl, 2 Super Bowls. He was a guy that a lot of Eagle fans were kind of kicking and screaming that because Brandon Graham was the guy that nobody wanted. Graham's the one guy who's still left. I think you tweeted this out earlier this morning, but Graham's still here, and now Jason Pierre-Paul, the Giants finally said, all right, we got to move on from this guy.
That was a tweet to the people who called Brandon a bust. I mean, Jason was a very, very good player in New York, especially before the fireworks accident. So it's not like it was a bust by any means. He was a tremendous player. He won a Super Bowl. Earl Thomas at 14 is on the trading block in Seattle. Obviously, he's going to the Hall of Fame, so he was a tremendous success with Seattle. But bottom line is, when September rolls around, there's a very good chance that of those three players, the only one remaining with the team that drafted him is a guy everybody thought was a bust earlier in his career. And bottom line is, last 3 years now, he's been one of the top 5 or 10 edge players in this league. And so a number of Eagles fans need to look in the mirror and scold themselves and apologize to a guy who's not only been that good, but he's also now officially a Super Bowl hero because he made the play that clinched the franchise's first Super Bowl.
The most important play in the history of the franchise, John.
Yeah, I don't argue with that. It's not going to be the most famous. I think the most famous is always going to be the Philly special.
No doubt.
And even that, the trigger man of that is now a Chicago Bear. That's how quickly things change in the NFL.
Can I just tell you, being in Clearwater for a week, there was no lack of Eagles chants walking around Mandalay Avenue.
Yeah, I mean, Eagles fans are great. I was just on Twitter and looking at one of the Tampa Bay, which is a silly thing to tweet, but one of the Tampa Bay writers tweeted that the Bucs might have the best pass rush in football now after they picked up JPP, Vinny Curry, and Bo Allen. Now, Vinny Curry and Bo Allen are average pass rushers, and JPP hasn't been the same since the accident, so it's silly from that standpoint. But her entire timeline is just filled with Eagles fans. Nobody else, just Eagles fans.
I saw that tweet, John. I was going to ask you about that. I also was going to say then, essentially, then the Giants paid $22.5 million for 1 year of Jason Pierre-Paul to get a third-round pick. I mean, that's no wonder people are getting fired up there, right? That was a pretty bad return on investment.
Realize the old regime did sign that contract extension. And again, they've shifted. They fired the general manager, Jerry Reese. Their head coach, Ben McAdoo's gone. It's now Dave Gettleman. It's now Pat Sherman. As I said, they're switching to a 3-4 with James Betcher, the old Cardinals defensive coordinator. So it's completely different people in charge, and he no longer fits what they want to do.
John, they don't have a draft pick from 2010 to 2013 on that roster.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why Jerry Reese doesn't have a job. But Dave Gettleman's the new GM. He's not responsible for that, obviously. And he's shifting things and going in a different direction. He was a very good personnel guy when he was in Carolina with the Panthers. We'll see how it works out with the Giants. But, yeah, that's all old regime stuff.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, at JF McMullen on Twitter. A couple other things to hit on here. We see Frank Gore is still in the league. He's going to Miami to sign with the Dolphins. And, Frank Gore's a guy that, we thought was going to be in Philly at this time 2 years ago.
Yeah, that was let the Eagles at the altar. Well, he's been a very, very good player for a very long time. Obviously, later stage of his career, and he finally gets to go home. He grew up in Miami, went to school, college at University of Miami. So I think from that point, it's a perfect fit for him to tie up his career in a bow to finally get back to Miami. Unfortunately, the Dolphins and Adam Gase are waiting for him, so I don't think it's going to work out too well. But that's not going to be a very good football team next season.
John, the former Temple standout and Jet Muhammad Wilkerson ends up in Green Bay on a one-year prove-it deal. Does this show that other teams around the league are looking at how the Eagles did these prove-it deals and say that's the way to go?
Yeah, well, I think the whole league is trending that way. Even the big deals are really 2-year deals. You constantly see the 5 years. Essentially, they're glorified 2-year deals, and they're just spun that way so the agents can look good in the newspapers, if anyone reads newspapers anymore. But yeah, and from the player's perspective, when you have a guy who's like really talented, like Wilkerson is, and he's coming off some issues with the Jets, and even his old teammate Sheldon Richardson, same thing with Minnesota, signed a 1-year deal for $8 million. It's in a lot of ways it's better for them because if they do play well, all of a sudden you got the Alshon Jeffrey situation, who signed it here, and then in December got the big money and the extension.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN. Real quick, John, there's a couple rule changes. Did we have a new catch?
No, they're working on it. I mean,
they're working on a new catch.
They're going to have a new catch rule. And the meetings are next week in Orlando. It's going to be approved then. I mean, that's one that they virtually admitted they wanted to change. They're going to change. And they should change. And we talked about it earlier in the week when you were gone. They really already changed part of it in the Super Bowl, as evidenced by the Corey Clement reception, which was overturned a number of times during the regular season. They realized they over-legislated that part of it. They kind of told Al Riveron to sort of dial it back. And now they're going to also change the surviving the ground rule. So the Des Bryant catch, the Jesse James catch, those are all going to be receptions moving forward.
And, John, how about this defensive pass interference and the talk about changing it maybe from a spot foul to a 15-yard penalty? Could that change?
Love to see him do it. Been wishing they would do it for over a decade. They're not going to do it. There is no way that is going to pass in this league. And I think it's a bad decision. I think it's one of the worst plays in football when you sort of have quarterbacks just throwing the ball up for grabs and a receiver will just come back and run into the defensive back, and all of a sudden a bad throw, bad play turns into a 50-yard gain. I think it's unfair to the defense, but they're not going to change it.
Yeah,
you're going to channel your Dana Carvey there. You're not going to do it. Wouldn't be prudent at this juncture.
Yeah, I don't. I hate the rule that allows you to chuck the ball down the field. I know some people say that it's not fair, but the college game doesn't seem to have a big problem with it.
No, and that's one thing always people bring up late in the game. Maybe in a key situation, you tackle a receiver instead of letting them have a touchdown if you're beat. But I also think you could sort of insert a rule, and I think you mentioned it before, Mike, that sort of like the clear pass in the NBA, basketball. You can make sense of that and say, look, if you're going to be obvious about it and you're going to do it to prevent a touchdown, then it is a 50-yard penalty. But for these ticky-tack ones, the college rule, 15 yards, it's a much better way to go about it.
All right, John. By the way, Vinny Curry going out with some style over on the, 95 there? Yeah. Put a billboard up. 2 claps to Ric Flair.
Yeah, Vinny's a big wrestling fan, huge Ric Flair fan.
I sat next to Vinny. I sat next to Vinny at SmackDown one night.
Yeah, he's a huge wrestling fan. Trivia, not a huge Johnny Mac fan. He's had me blocked on Twitter.
He blocked me. He blocked me too.
I'm the winner. He has never blocked me. I don't know if to be honored or disrespected.
Which I've joked with him in the past. I said, "Isn't it time? Isn't it time to unblock me?" But he hasn't come to that.
Yeah, I don't know if he blocked me. Maybe because he's Marshall and I'm WVU.
Possibly. I think it's because I called him an average pass rusher time and time again, which he is, but he's not an average guy. He's a very good guy.
Yes. Sports Bash Live, the NFL never sleeps. We got the draft coming up April 26th right here on 97.3 ESPN. I have an interesting question about that we'll get to a little bit later. Johnny Mac at JF McMullen, he's trusting the process.
Yeah, get your shot in. All right. I appreciate it.
Take care, pal.
Thanks.